Welcome to the Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Lauren Lane. For over 50 years, the LSI team has been dedicated to the science of business development. We've seen the impact of our work and how it's evolved into economic development and now social impact work. This week, Sean and I are joined by Robert Crumpy, a prominent businessman with decades of construction and building experience in Beverly Hills, California. Robert's father, Robert Sr., was one of Sean's big mentors back in the day, so we're going to talk about Sean's inspiring moments with Bob Sr., Robert's current career, and what the future might hold. Let's jump in.
Bob, I'm so excited to have this time with you, and thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us this morning to talk about your dad. He was such an amazing individual with a lot of vision, and I mean, I've got my angle on this, but I would love to hear what it was like growing up with your dad, also your namesake, Bob Crumpy. And I don't know, I'm a little emotional about just even thinking about this. I was worried this was gonna happen to me. A few weeks ago, Summer came into my office and she said, "Hey, I just got a call from someone named Bob Crumpy. He says he knows you." And I said, "That's impossible." And she said, "Well, here's his number." And I said, "Get him on the phone. Let me talk to him." And then I started putting it together. Okay, maybe this is Bob's son. And sure enough, it was. And so happy to have connected with you. And as I had mentioned to you that last year we celebrated the company's 50th anniversary. And during that time, we did a whole campaign around the titans of LSI and who really made LSI. And I really think of your father as one of those pillars of LSI. And not only that, but he took such a real interest in me and my career. And I talked to him almost every day, and you know how he was, and just that quiet, very humble way would give me guidance, and you might want to think about this. But as I said, your dad was also visionary. I mean, we're going to talk about his Air Force career, and I'd love to get into that. But maybe tell me what it was like growing up. You're the oldest in the family, and growing up in the Crumpy household.
Well, let's see. I was born in Houston, Texas. My parents were from Cincinnati, Ohio. They were born and raised there. My dad went to ROTC at the University of Cincinnati and joined the Air Force in 51 when he graduated college. And he was in for 30 plus years, retired as a full colonel, turned down general 3 times. Because what I didn't know, and he told me, was that full colonels could name their next assignment. So he would always keep getting a new job within the Air Force, but at El Segundo, I think they call it Space Division now. It was called SAMSO, right. Space and Missile Systems Organization. And there was a famous 3-star general that he worked underneath in 72. They started what was called SP, Special Projects. Turned out later when it was declassified, he was able to say that he was in on the beginning of starting Star Wars, SDI, and they found a way with lasers to be able to knock out a Russian ICBM. As soon as they opened the silo door, our satellites would know it. They could tell, and then they would, they could focus a laser on the warhead and the missile and blow it up in the silo if they wanted to before it launched. So I think that changed the dynamics around the planet politically and logistically. But prior to that, I mean, we moved a lot. So, it wasn't, I never blamed my parents for what I went through, but it was tough. You get moved every couple of years, especially as I got in my preteens and teens and started developing really close friendships with my friends. It got to the point where it was so painful to leave. And then, so the next town, it was a little harder to make a friend because you knew they were going to leave again, pretty soon. So but when I look back on it now, for sure, I'm older. I was so grateful for all the experiences. Got to see so much of the United States. We never did go overseas because my dad had the highest security clearances in the government, and they weren't going to send him to Vietnam where he could get shot down as a pilot, and then they get captured and tortured and brainwashed. He'd spill the beans, as he would say. But I mean, even when I was born, we were only in Houston for 3 months, and my mother took me back to Cincinnati because my dad went to Japan for the Korean War. He was a navigator on a B-29 bomber. And he said that all the guys on their crews, that they all had to take psychological tests to see if they were capable of killing themselves. And that, so everybody on the cruise, they all had cyanide tablets in their outfits, their pilot gear, because all their missions were over China. Every one of them, they bombed China because they were getting the supplies to North Korea with troops and ammunition and food and everything. So that's whether strategically we were bombing them. But in those days, they didn't have CNN and all the satellite news groups. So the Chinese representative would go to the UN and pound the table and say, this is my dad telling me that, he'd be pounding the table saying, the Americans are bombing us. And our ambassador, he was either a great actor or they kept him in the dark because he would just shrug his shoulders and I don't know what the hell they're talking about, Because and my dad said they were told if they survived the crash in China, they were to take the cyanide tablet, so they couldn't be captured and be made prisoners of war. So.
Have you read the book Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell?
No, sounds good.
Oh my goodness!
Bomber Mafia.
It's called The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell, and here's my recommendation, and for you and everyone that's listening, I read I got a copy of the real book, and then I downloaded his audio version of it, which was fantastic. And so even if people say, oh, I don't really like listening to audiobooks, for this one, do that, because Malcolm Gladwell went back and took the recordings from the Air Force in how the Norton bomb site was developed. And the interesting thing, it's interesting that you started with this story, because I can remember your father telling me what it was like to be a navigator on these B-29s and using these Norton bomb sites. And correct me if I'm wrong, but when you said your dad grew up in Cincinnati, I think that he grew up like in the Miami Valley of Ohio. He told me that, he grew up in this little town, and most people that he knew went to work for Procter and Gamble, and he kind of thought he was going to do that, and somehow got an engineering degree. Your dad was a genius, and I think either read or listen to this audio book of the Bomber Mafia to understand it was the secret, the highest technology in the United States. I mean, there was no other technology that was more protected. And all of these guys that were navigators and had access to the Norton bomb site, they were given instruction, you will destroy the bomb site and then take this cyanide pill so that they couldn't torture the secrets of this out of you. But I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm telling you, read that book, listen to the audio. It is fantastic. It's an amazing story of World War II and really moving us into the Korean War and into the Cold War.
Yeah, get back to, you brought up something I forgot to mention. Both of my grandfathers were civil engineers. My dad's dad worked for 45 years for Procter and Gamble, and when he retired, he was the senior vice president of the whole engineering department. And he had designed the plants that are in Long Beach, California, and Oxnard, California, for them as well. And they thought they were doing him a favor. They retired him 2 years full pay early, I think my theory was it killed him because he was such a busy guy. He always used to tell me, there's one thing that always stuck with me in business. He would say, Bobby, he said, if you want to get something done in this world, you give it to a busy man. Because he said, a busy man will find out a way to get it done. He says, you don't want to give it to somebody who has no work or nothing going on, because he says, nothing will happen.
You're exactly right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So your dad was this legacy Procter and Gamble employee, was probably, everybody thought that he was going to go to work for Procter and Gamble. How do you know? Did he tell you? Was he maybe he was drafted? Is that how he got?
No, I think he volunteered. I think it helped. I think he might have gotten a partial scholarship, or I know he went on a work because he was an engineer. They did he was a 5-year student. He graduated high school in 46, but didn't graduate college till 51 because he was on work study. He worked for a big construction company called H.K. Ferguson, I think, out of Cleveland. And anyway, he worked for them, and he got a degree in mechanical engineering. And then later on, when I was in first and second grade, we were in Dayton, Ohio, and he went to the Air Force Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And he got his master's degree in aeronautical engineering with a minor in astronautics. And he was in line to be one of the first Mercury or Gemini astronauts. But he was 6'2.5", 6'3", and he was too big for the capsule. He had, if you ever see the movie The Right Stuff, he said he went through all the physical testing that they did, and all the mental stuff. And he knew physics very well and math, so he was really good at all that stuff. And he I know it was a big disappointment. I said he was a navigator. He wanted to be a pilot. He told me that when I was born, he was at Ellington Air Force Base down near Houston. I think it's closed now, or it's a reserve base, but he told me that he came in one day and his name was scratched off the list for pilot training. And he said the day before he had his first solo landing, but with a trainer in the back. And he said I didn't bounce that plane more than any commercial. He said I've had commercial pilots a lot worse bounce our planes when we're landing. And he said it was his first landing on his own. But he said he came in very smooth, and he just took a little hop and then proceeded down the runway. And he said he was scratched off as a pilot because they had so many candidates for pilot, and because he bounced the plane one time, he got kicked out. So I know that upset him. And
do you remember your dad flying?
Oh yeah,
you do. Yeah. Okay, so
he used to take me down to the flight line wherever we were at, because he was. Eventually, he had 4 kids. I was the oldest of 4, and he used to tell me he needed the extra pay to send us to private schools, because we didn't go to none of it. We hardly went to public school at any time. And so he got an extra, I don't know, 200 to 250 a month for extra hazardous duty pay, but he had to fly a minimum of 4 hours every month. So like when we were based in LA, he'd fly to Hawaii with a crew and back. And, they would take milk and eggs to the guys in Hawaii and come back with pineapples and coconuts and mahi-mahi, And when we lived in DC, he went to Bermuda a lot from Andrews. They would fly to Bermuda. One time he went on a famous trip. I don't know if he ever told you about it. He went to Africa for like 10 days. They had to go to a CENTO conference. Well, they had to take congressmen and senators to a CENTO conference, Central European Treaty. And it was in Turkey. So my dad got the crew convinced. I don't know how they justified it, but they flew the plane from Turkey down to Mombasa, Kenya. And they went on a safari, and they planned out the whole trip. They went to Mount Kilimanjaro. He's got the greatest home movies. And of course, my dad, they put him in a lounge chair on top of a VW bus, and he's got his 8mm camera, and they got wildebeest running right next to him on the right, and they got antelope on the left, and he said they had zebras, and then one time they go by and you see these lions staring at them, and the lions have got blood all over. They're chowing down on a zebra. And the big male lion looks up and looks right at my dad's lens. I mean, we still got that on the home movie, just looks right at the lens. And my dad's taps the lid of says, "Let's get out of here, guys." he says, I think I was the lion was sizing me up because he knew I was outside the car, on top. But yeah, they sat in the sun for 8 hours one day. About 9 a.m, they were going somewhere, and the guy, they had a guy who spoke Swahili. He was a local, and he said, "Stop," to the driver. And they sat in the hot sun for 9 hours until like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because there was 2 bull elephants feeding on. They were down in the dried out riverbed feeding on the leaves of the trees. And the driver said, "You don't piss these guys off. They'll track us down. They'll chase us for miles to come get us, you know. So they just sat there and nothing happened. And then the best one of all was, and my dad's got all this on his home video or his home movies. They were right along this brush, and the grass was like 5 feet high on both sides. And just even from his perch on the van, he said the road was down lower than the fields. He couldn't see over the top of them. But they see this little young black kid with just a loincloth, and he had a slingshot in his loincloth, and he's got a watermelon on his shoulder. And my dad said his knees were bowed because of the weight of the watermelon, but he's holding it. And the driver says, let's buy the watermelon for the kid. They give him a couple of bucks. It'll make his month, you know, if he has two American dollars. So they stop, and they ended up giving him $10. They had warm Cokes. They gave him a Coke, and they gave him a Hershey candy bar. And the kid was like ecstatic, you know, plus the $10. So he said something nice to them in Swahili, and he turned to the brush and puts his fingers in his lips and whistles really loud. And they said the earth starts shaking, boom, 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 boom. And out of the brush comes a full-grown rhino. And the kid told the guide that he had found him as a puppy, abandoned by his mother. His mother got killed, and he raised him. And he could tell this. He could, with signals with whistles, he could get this thing to attack anything if he wanted it to. You know, it was like his best friend. And he says to the guys that he likes Cokes. So my dad goes, and he's got his flight line glasses on, and he's got his short haircut, and it's in the 60s. I always told him it should have been a Coca-Cola Super Bowl commercial, you know, where they just go, and because my dad's holding the rhino's horn, and he's got the Coke bottle, and the tongue of the thing's coming out, just lapping up every ounce of the Coke. And my dad said he was whimpering like a puppy dog, you know, this big rhino. And then my dad's smiling, and the guy's got his camera, and I'm sitting there going, Dad, they would at the thing would just go, things go better with Coke, you know. It's like, I mean, you know, we still have that film. I think I've wanted to submit it to Coke, but I figure they might just rip off the idea, you know. If you don't know the right people there, they just go make it their own thing, you know. But this is classic, you know. It's like, but they, you know, so then they went back to, well, I guess Istanbul or wherever it was, and wherever that was in Turkey, picked up the senators and congressmen 10 days later and brought them back home. But they got refueled in midair coming from Washington. So they had two crews, two sets of pilots, co-pilots, and navigators, and one would sleep while the other one was flying it. And then they get refueled, and then the other guys they didn't have to land; they flew all the way, nonstop.
So you said you remember being in Dayton, Ohio. That was probably like going home for your dad, and
yeah, we get to see all of our relatives in Cincinnati a lot more.
What year did your dad first go to Los Angeles?
We went there in 1960 after he finished the got his master's degree. We went there in 1960 to 64. And he was in a recovery system. He had flying C-130s, and they would have the back end down with a big guy wire coming out the back, and a computer that would tell them when the satellite was going to be in a certain area. They were doing that because he was leading the team to practice for our space program, because, you know, sometimes the retro rockets would misfire on the Geminis and the Mercuries, and there was a possibility they could land in Cuba, you know, Russian ally, you know. And in the early days, our stuff wasn't all civilian. It was civilian and military. When the NASA guys were going up, they were doing stuff for the military, for defense and stuff. So they had to be able to capture the capsule and not let it get into Russian hands.
And people have forgotten that. There was such a collaboration between the U.S. Air Force and NASA, and now it's so divided. But at the time, in the initial space program, there was this strong collaboration between the U.S. Air Force and NASA, and really. So for your dad to have gone through all of the space training, and he really knew that firsthand, And I think what's interesting about his career was that it gave him this perspective and also allowed him to really be this visionary around what does this program look like. I remember the first time I met your dad, he said to me, he was giving me this history and the history of the space program, both the NASA program and the U.S. Air Force program. And I just can remember him telling me, at some point there is going to be an agency called the U.S. Space Force. And I thought, no way, that'll never happen. And sure enough, unfortunately, your dad didn't live to see it, but it was, he had that vision that at some point it would, the U.S. Space Force would be its own agency, just like the Air Force, Army, Navy, the Marine Corps.
Right.
Do you remember him talking about, did he ever mention the story of the original Schoolhouse Gang in Los Angeles? Have you ever heard that term?
Schoolhouse Gang?
It was a,
I heard that.
Okay, so before Los Angeles Air Force Base, which your dad was the commander of eventually.
It was actually his last tour of duty.
It was his last tour of duty.
3.5 years he was the base commander. Yeah.
I mean, and again, just I think this is so visionary. When he first went to Los Angeles, there was an abandoned schoolhouse where now the Los Angeles Air Force Base is, which is really adjacent to LAX. It's probably the most expensive real estate in the United States Air Force. And your dad's fingerprints are all over that base. I mean, he helped design and lay out that base. But when you first,
I mean, he got them a commissary. They never had that. We used to have to go down to Terminal Island in Long Beach, but the Navy doesn't even have that anymore.
No.
And he put in base housing at Fort MacArthur in San Pedro. A funny story on that was I'm in construction, right? And he's trying to get me the job. And I said, Dad, this is too weird. You're gonna get in trouble with the government. Colonel Robert Crumpy's giving Robert Crumpy the job as the contractor. I said, Dad, there's gonna be too much, some senator will want to investigate that,
That's
so,
exactly
but it was
right.
1,200 units they put in down there. Because that was the biggest thing, is because the LA property values are so high, and it's hard for an airman or a secretary to afford that and send their kids to school. So they put in affordable base housing down at Fort MacArthur, which was kind of decommit. It wasn't really an active army base.
So he was part of this Schoolhouse Gang, what eventually became Los Angeles Air Force Base, which is mammoth and just in the middle of, like I said, adjacent to LAX, and it's just this incredible installation. Initially, when he first was stationed there under the now very famous General Schriever, who Schriever Air Force or Schriever Space Base is named after in Colorado Springs. He worked for General Schriever, and your dad had found a abandoned Christian schoolhouse, and that was their headquarters there. And at that time, it was this top secret program where it was going to be the headquarters for what's now the ICBM, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile System. And it was all that the strategy was all being worked out of this abandoned school, this little school, which is now sits on what's LA Air Force Base. And for years it was called the Space and Missile Center.
Yeah, SAMSO.
Yeah. And SAMSO, which your father was instrumental in, not just naming, but I mean, he built it from the ground up. So you got there in 1960. Right. What was he reassigned
Yeah, we
Oh,
were at Christmas of 64. He got transferred
would you remember
to
where?
the Pentagon.
Oh, so then that's when you went to DC, right?
That's when he got into defensive missile systems. And then he ended up not graduating. He got promoted 2 years ahead of his peers because of his outstanding work. There were two other officers. One committed suicide, and then two others. One left at 19 years 3 months, and the other one was 19 years 7 months. They quit the Air Force. They couldn't hang. It was such a crazy. I mean, my dad would leave at 6 in the morning to go to the Pentagon. We were in suburban Maryland. He wouldn't come home till 9 or 10 o'clock at night.
And that was how all of those guys were. They were so, and I mean, all of my mentors, that's how they all were until until the end, till they retired. They were just so dedicated to this mission. While your dad was at the Pentagon, incredibly, he was working with these really the captains of the ICBM and space industry, and really shaped a lot of that work during that time. I mean, he worked with Robert McNamara, who then became obviously the Secretary of Defense, Bernie Schriever, we talked about, Jake Jacobson, who was also a friend of mine and was instrumental in the history of our company. We can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, he was one of your founding partners, right?
That's exactly.
Along with your grandfather.
That's right. All friends. But and General Glasser and some of these individuals that went on to develop the Atlas system and all of the various rocket systems that were all coming out of LA Air Force Base, the Space and Missile Center.
Yeah, my dad would give me lectures about that. He says, "Well, we live in a democracy, son, and we got to be able to tell our citizens where the ICBMs are, and there's usually a placard out at the roadside, so this is a U.S. Defense Department installation or something like that." But he said, with Russia not being a democracy, we had to go find them. So that was what he was doing from 64 to 68, was sending satellites on a north-south orbit around the Earth. And from 500 miles in space, we had such sophisticated cameras even back then. They could photograph the entire countryside of Russia and find out where the ICBM silos were. And then they'd plot them, and then they would send that, and then after that, from 68 to 72, he came back to California, and he was in offensive missile systems. And then that's when he got made deputy to General Myers for SP in 72, which started the Star Wars. And he did that for 3 years. But he was a full colonel that whole time, getting to stay in the same house. It was his last 13 and a half years in the Air Force. My parents were in the same house. They didn't have to move. And he was doing that for not my next brother, but from my sister and my youngest brother, because he called me and my brother rebels. We rebelled against his lifestyle, and he figured it's because of our unstable childhoods. We were getting moved around all the time. And so, but he did that on his own. I mean, I had to admire him. I know he gave up he easily could have retired a 3-star general. I know that without
he definitely could have. And yet what he did there, some of the programs that he has his permanent imprint on were historic. He worked all of the satellite systems at LA Air Force Base that started with the MILSATCOM, the Military Satellite and Communication program that really still to this day is the basis for the U.S. weather system. All of the satellite imagery that is used today is the constellation of MILSATCOM, which your dad was the commander of at one point. GPS. I mean, the GPS system, which was a classified system for years, early in I don't know the exact date, but I want to say the mid 1970s. or, maybe even the early 1970s.
I think in the mid-70s, after he was in SP, he was logistics officer, like the S4, I think they call it,
Yes.
supply officer for all the satellite tracking facilities throughout the whole world. He had them from whether they needed sophisticated telemetry stuff or, telescopes or whatever, to whatever or to toilet paper, whatever they needed at those satellite tracking facilities. I remember he and my mother he did a work vacation, and he took her around the world in 30 days, and they visited they went to Alaska, Hawaii, somewhere in the Orient, the Seychelles Islands, I think there's one, and maybe there's one in England or something. But they went around the whole world, went basically through Hawaii and Tokyo and Hong Kong, and then they were in the same. My mother brought home a bougainvillea, kept it live from the Seychelles, and it's still in her yard, grows like a weed,
Yes.
Yeah.
So, as I said, your dad, he was the commander of every one of these systems, and most people don't realize this. Los Angeles Air Force Base, I don't think ever in its history did it have aircraft stationed there. It was always a engineer.
No, they did.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah, because my dad flew, and when he go to Hawaii for his 4 hours a month, it was a 4-engine, I think a DC-7.
Okay.
It
was it? And now I think that got transferred over to LAX.
Well, now it's like FedEx or DHL's they tore all that stuff down, because my dad used to take me there to the hangar there, and that's where I'd get to crawl around the planes and sit in the car, on the pilots. He'd show me what all the instruments were for and stuff like that.
So there was some administrative aircraft there. There was a runway there that then got transferred to LAX, but most of that base was engineering.
Well, they were on the south side of LAX, and they would just taxi from there right out onto the taxiways of the LAX and take, it's like Hickam is with, Honolulu Airport.
That's right.
Kind of similar thing, but it was called the LA Air Force Station, not base.
That's correct.
Probably because they only had the one. I think they had the 1-4. They had like it wasn't a Learjet, but it was like a Air Force trainer. Like it holds 6 passengers. I think that was for for maybe the general at the base there, if he had to go to DC for some reason or go somewhere. I think they had 2 planes. They had the 4-prop plane and they had the jet. Exactly. That was it.
So during that time, as I said, he was the commander of all of these this technology that now we can't live without. I mean, the GPS system is so a part of our lives and your dad was a part of that. The MilSatcom program, all the range systems, and then, as you said, eventually his last assignment he was the commander of LA Air Force Base, and was just such I know that he gave up being a general officer for his family, but he had every bit of visibility and was such a hero for what is now the U.S. Space Force. And so he never moved again. I'm sure you remember when he retired. Then I believe he went to work for.
I sent Lauren. Lauren has a picture of his. I just sent her today.
Of his retirement?
At the general shaking his hand at his retirement ceremony.
Amazing. But were you there? Or do you remember that?
Yes. Yeah, I was there. Yeah.
So, and then went to work for McDonnell Douglas, which is now
Martin Marietta first.
Oh, he did. Martin. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Martin
and he quit there. He was there 5 years. Was eligible for a pension.
Yeah.
But he whistle blew on his boss, because he found out his boss was getting the U.S. government to pay for his personal use of private jets. He was having an affair on his wife, and he was taking his girlfriend down to Mexico like almost every weekend. And my dad couldn't stand, and he found out his boss said it was an extra to the U.S. government for something that he would have them make up phony invoices. And my dad couldn't, you knew my dad, you couldn't stand that. It wasn't even the affair, but it was what he was, forging the documents to make it look like there were overruns on programs, and it wasn't true at all. So he turned his whistleblow copy to his boss. They had already sent it to Congress, and he said, "Here's my resignation." Walked down the hall. It was in the same place in El Segundo, and went down. And he already had the job lined up with Boeing Douglas, and went and worked for them for 6 years, and that put him to like 92, because he retired in 81, so 11 years at Boeing and Martin Marietta, and that brought him to 92 when he started LSI, or came to work with you at LSI. He started the LA office.
So let's talk about that. That it was, everyone knew your dad within LSI. It was, they had interfaced with him. At that time, General Jake Jacobson became the CEO of Draper Labs, and he and your father were very close. And at some point, we'll do a story on General Jacobson, also a tremendous leader and part of the pioneers of the space program as well, and from Bountiful, Utah. So interesting connection. And you're right, he was friends with my grandfather, and had known Jerry for many years, and throughout their time in the Air Force, they knew each other as children, and then had worked together in the Air Force. And then General Jacobson called my grandfather and said, I really need your help. And one of the individuals that we need is Bob Crumpy. And so, interestingly enough, I was put on the Draper account at that time. And Draper Labs was a spinoff of MIT, which our company helped do. Prior to that, we were working with this group within MIT in Cambridge. We convinced MIT to spin this out, prior to my being there. And like I said, in 92, your dad was hired by the company to run the LA office. And I can't remember who started first, and I cannot find the information on it, but I think we started about the same time. It was, I know that I'd heard the stories that there was this strategy and that they were going to recruit your dad out of McDonnell Douglas, which I think was still McDonnell Douglas. I don't think Boeing had acquired him by that time. And so I don't know who started first, if I started first or if your dad started first, but we were both on the engagement, the Draper engagement together, and got to know each other. And he just became my mentor, and I talked to your dad every day. He'd call me every day and give me some ideas and guidance. And you're right, he had the highest integrity and had the biggest heart, and just was so proud of his family. And I felt like I knew all of your mom. I got to see. There were a lot of times that we would do strategy and various events, and your dad would bring your mom to Salt Lake, or we would do these events around the country. So I got to spend time with not just your dad, but your mom as well, who I just think highly of also. And
yeah, we just saw her on Sunday. She's still in the same house all by herself. She's amazing. She gets around.
Individual. Your dad, oftentimes he was somebody that I knew I could call and just say, Bob, I've got this idea, and he was a good sounding board for me, and was not afraid to, like I said, in this very humble but firm Colonel way, that he would say to me, yeah, let's do this, or that is terrible. That's a terrible idea. We're not, don't think about that. And I remember spending an evening with him in LA, and we probably sat and talked for I don't know, 4 or 5 hours. We had dinner and talked about the future of the company. And he said, this company has a lot of potential. And at that time, I was really concerned. I had just acquired the company from the original five principals that had the founding principals. And there was a lot of change going on with the Department of Defense and the budget and whatnot. And one of the things I still remember your dad saying was, he said, I lived through that my whole career. I got jerked around. We were going to do this and we were going to do this. And we figured out a way to make sense out of it. And he said, you need to do that too. And it really was at that time, I thought, oh yeah, I'm not in this box. I'm not in this, and here's this, elder statesman giving me advice that was just amazing that really helped me refocus and rethink about the potential of our company and what it could become. And he gave me this confidence too that okay, I could go do this. And listening to some of his stories about, yeah, I got moved out to Los Angeles. There wasn't even a place to meet. We were meeting in this abandoned schoolhouse, and look what we did. We built a whole base around it. And that kind of enthusiasm and optimism and vision he instilled in me, and just was such an important part of my life. And I think about him a lot. And so that brings us full circle. So I said, I shared this with you a few weeks ago that interestingly, I've been thinking about your dad a lot over the last few months, and and then I get this call. I mean, just unbelievable. Like, I get this call, and then you had said too that you'd been thinking about, you had started this new company and working with this company that you'd been thinking the same thing, that maybe your dad been thinking about your dad, who was saying you need to call Sean at LSI, and that's how we reconnected after all these years.
Yeah.
So, Bob, let's talk about you. I mean, you've got an amazing career and history in your own right, and I mean, talk about. So you come back to Los Angeles. Your dad's there for the remainder of his career, and you become a California boy. Tell me what it was like coming back, and then talk about your career.
Coming back, what time? Because we came back twice.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to LA that last time, and then you stayed there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, when we came back in the summer of '68, and I remember we took 2 weeks to go across country. It was a very interesting year in the '60s. It was the year that Martin Luther King got assassinated, Bobby Kennedy. We were in D.C. when they there was riots and protests from the Martin Luther King. I mean, they had 4 tanks surrounding the White House with machine gun sandbag ready to take attacks. And it was we could, at night from our house in Maryland, we were just on the border of Southeast DC, about a mile away. You could hear the gunshots at night. You could smell the smoke from all the rioting that was going on. They're burning stuff. It was pretty wild times.
Absolutely.
And then '68, when we were coming across country, we stopped at the Air Force Academy because my dad, that's where I wanted to go, following my dad's footsteps. But my vision wasn't good enough for pilot training, so I was like 2040 and 2050. So they put me on a waiver list to be a navigator. And then same thing happened. Naval Academy was my second choice. And then same thing, you got to be 100% qualified for medically to be a pilot. Even though you may not have the aptitude to be a pilot, they want you to train as it and see if they can get something out of you. So I ended up going to West Point. Army doesn't care. You can wear glasses down in the rice paddy with grenades blowing up around you. You're not flying a $16 million aircraft. So anyway, I graduated high school in Torrance area of south of the LAX airport, about 10 miles. And I got, graduated in 1970, May 31st. And then on July 1st, 1970, I was reporting in new cadet Grumpy. It's like, and it was such a culture shock. I had, my idea of the military was my dad and his jet jockey buddies, they were all kind of loose, goose, mavericks in their own right. They weren't crazy disciplinarians. They had discipline, but they weren't like screaming and yelling types like the Marines and West Point has. The West Point definitely takes themselves very seriously. When I got into West Point, they said the statistics were that only 3% of the Army officers were West Pointers, but over 2/3 of the generals were West Pointers.
Yes.
So they're training the future chiefs of staff there. That's what they're all about.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So I reported in there, and then I decided to quit in June of 72. Well, actually it was March 72. I wanted to prove to my parents that I could put up with the worst. I wasn't quitting because I couldn't take it. Your hardest year overall is your plebe year. Yeah. And then the second year, you don't have many upperclassmen responsibilities like you do as a junior or senior. So they load up the academic. That's when you get hit the hardest with the academics. We were taking 24 units a semester there. And we had math. I validated math. So I only had to take a year and a half of math, but you have to take 2 if you don't validate it. And taking a test. And so, 72, I left and I came back home, went to UCLA. It was a little tough, to be honest with you, because Mom and Dad were pretty disappointed. I understood that, they go into military parties and everybody's going, "How's your son doing at West Point?" "No, he's doing great," And then when I quit, they had to say, "Well, he quit," And, I knew they were going through a lot too, but I was living at home. My first year, I went to UCLA and I played rugby there and then I coached my youngest brother in soccer full time, and I had a full-time job as a movie theater manager in 73. And then 74, I got a job at PSA, the airlines that had the smile painted on the front of their planes. It's where Southwest got their idea to do what we were called Pacific Southwest Airlines.
Yeah.
And they were a bunch of pilots from World War II that would fly cargo junkets from San Diego to Oakland. And then they started flying illegal aliens in. They would have representatives in Mexico, and they'd say, "Hey, come to this point at this time, and we'll get you on a plane, and we'll take you to the interior of the country." And they'd take them to Oakland. And then the bastards would then call up the INS, and they'd say, "Hey, we think we got some illegals that got on our plane in San Diego. They're going to be landing in Oakland in about a half an hour," And then the federal government would show up and arrest them all and send them, and then pay PSA to fly them back. So they pay for a one-way ticket to get in, and then the government was paying that. And they openly told us that our indoctrination, that he said they thought it was kind of a cute story how they built the company. And I was like, man, that's pretty rough. Misleading people like that, and then squealing on it, knowing the government will pay you to fly them back. So anyway,
let me ask you this:
yeah.
How did you not go to Vietnam? Was it because you were in school?
Well, that was I didn't tell this to many people for a long time, but internally, because I was against, the Vietnam War at that time.
Yeah.
And I used to read a lot of books, a lot of conspiracy things about all the different groups in the U.S. government that benefited from the thing. But I never told my dad, but it was my way of going to Vietnam, was going to West Point, because the class of 74, which I was in at West Point, it was in the last class that the Congress said could graduate one day and the next day go to the service, change to the service of their father as long as he was active duty. So I figured I could go to West Point. The only way I'm going to get in the Air Force Academy, I might be flying jets over there and get shot down by a SAM missile or something, and end up in a prisoner of war camp. But I figured, as an Air Force guy who can't fly, maybe I'm in an intelligence office in Saigon, Right. And the chances of me I'm not going to be up in the battlefield. It wasn't that I was a chicken. I just didn't want to support the thing that was going on. But they didn't have many choices. But then in the spring of my sophomore year, 72, is when Nixon. That was the other thing. I could see Nixon wanted to get us out of the war. So, and then they had the lottery. and my birthday September 30th, and it came out, and the number came up. That's when I decided to finally put in my papers to leave. It was my number came up 289. My birthday was 289, and I figured the chances of me going to Vietnam would be, even getting drafted, would be slim to none at number 289. So sure enough, that's what I did.
Amazing.
And
So
I never had to go to Vietnam, but
graduated from UCLA studying engineering?
I was, after 3 years at West Point, UCLA gave me, I'm sorry, 2 years at West Point. They gave me 3 full years of credit at UCLA.
My goodness.
And my GPA at West Point was 3.56, 3.6, something like that. They upped it to a 4.0.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I went into see my guidance guys, and I said, the dean, and I said, this is a mistake. And they should know. She said, no, it isn't. She said that West Point, she goes, not even Naval Academy or Air Force Academy, but West Point is equivalent to Harvard, MIT.
That's right.
And she said, you got one of the strictest, most severe educations. We know that in the college world, And I go, they don't even have majors, and they still don't.
Yeah.
They have, it's called areas of concentration.
Right.
So I got into history at that time. I had a major. He was a character. He was, I think I had him my freshman year for history, and then he nominated me for an advanced history class that he wanted to start my sophomore year. And his name was Dave Thaxton. This guy had 3 masters and a PhD. He had a master's in American history, a master's in film editing, and a master's and a PhD in film history. He cataloged for the Library of Congress all the movies made between 1910 and 1920, and all the movies of the 50s. He's seen every one that's available on this planet in those timeframes. And he would do a review, say who the stars were, the running length, who the director was, all the key people, and what the story was about. And to this day, he's still, like, when you watch the Academy Awards, they might be talking about somebody and they'll show like an old clip from something, or they want to show Humphrey Bogart and they show a bunch of his clips. He's the one that finds all those clips.
Oh my goodness.
He still gets paid by the Academy a lot of money, and that's all he says. He works maybe 10 to 20 hours a week, and he gets paid really well to find all that stuff. But he was dating Stanley Kubrick's sister. They were engaged, actually. And he's listed as the first assistant director on 2001: A Space Odyssey.
My goodness.
But he said he was an illegitimate son of one of the DuPont, the guy who started DuPont Chemical.
Yeah.
He said his mother was one of his mistresses, and he was a result of it. And he said that DuPont would always give her a lot of money for him. But when it came time for college, he said, I didn't go to college. He's got to earn his way. So he said he was a member of the SDS back in the 60s, Students for a Democratic Society.
Oh my goodness.
But then he needed to pay for graduate school because he got all those master's degrees, and he was going to Rutgers. So he applied for an Army ROTC scholarship for graduate school, and that's how he got into the Army. I said, how did you get past him? He said, I just lied. I lied on the form. I didn't show any connection to the SDS. I wasn't going to put any of that stuff down. I became really good friends with him. He was actually, he liked me because the first day he comes into class for the advanced classes, he goes, okay, class, my name is not Captain Thaxton. He says, I'm going to get promoted next week to major, but he says, you can call me Dave. And he says, I want you to loosen your tie up, take off your shoes, kick them up on the desk, and relax and enjoy this class. So I did it. I undid my tie. I took off my shoes. I crossed my feet up on my desk, and I said, okay, Dave, what's happening today? And he looks at me and he says, I like you, Crumpy. And he goes, and the rest of the class is looking at me like, oh, you kiss ass, But we became he used to help me get off base. He would stick me in the trunk of his car because he lived in Highland Falls, which was right outside the gates. And I didn't have a weekend pass, but he would like sneak me off, and he'd set me, and he was like 10 years older than me. His girlfriend would try to find girls that were maybe 3 or 4 years younger than her that she was friends with. She'd set me up with women that were like 5 and 6 years older than me, Nice. But we would go down to New York City and go see movies down there. And I mean,
it's amazing.
The movie Woodstock?
Yeah. Oh,
True story. We were watching it one night at his apartment, and this guy, he was a history major and he had a lot of books. He had more cans of film than he had books. He had the original colored cartoon of Disney that introduced Donald Duck.
oh
He
my.
had the Umbrellas of Cherbourg with that famous French. She used to do the Chanel commercials. Catherine Deneuve.
Right.
She was in Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and he had Birth of a Nation. You ever see that?
Oh my, and that's probably
We watched it probably 10 times on the wall of his apartment. What a great movie.
Unbelievable.
But I said, did you ever see Woodstock? And he goes, I saw it on the wall in my bathroom in my apartment in New York. And I said, how did you see it on the wall of your bathroom? He says, well, my friend was the director of the movie. And he brought over 5 canisters of film because it was a real long movie. And there were like 2 or 3 rolls, 20-minute rolls in each one. He said they were brought over to his apartment. He says, I wasn't there. And he said, I told my doorman to let him in. And they stuck him right inside my door because they didn't want to come into my apartment. But he said they didn't know my radiator was right there. And it was wintertime. And he said he comes home from his date, turns on the light, and these cans are in there and they're hot. And he opened them up and he said they were starting to stick together. The celluloid was gluing together. It was melting. So he said, thank God New York's a great city, for all night city. So he called the local guys that he knew. They were open 24 hours, and he got the chemical that he needed because he got a master's degree in film editing, and he put him in his bathtub. And he clamped on the side these 2 things, and he cranked them through. And he said he loosened them all up. He said he got the film to detach by putting this chemical on there. He said he saved the day. Otherwise, we would never ever. You imagine all that footage, and we'd never ever seen it.
Amazing.
I know. That's how he saw it on the walls of his bathroom tile, on the white tile in his bathroom.
So when you left West Point and went to UCLA, that must have been a culture shock. I mean,
definitely. I go from West Point.
Academy, you go back and it's probably mayhem at UCLA, right?
Yeah. Bill Walton was there. He and I were friends. We were both history majors. I was playing rugby and I separated my shoulder in a game. And so I was in the training room and he's there for basketball in the training room, because rugby and basketball are the same time of the year. We went from January to like May. And
all these kids with long hair and you've got a crew cut.
Well, my hair was down to my shoulders.
It was.
Oh, yeah.
At the academy?
No, when I got out.
All right.
I did all kinds of things. We couldn't have our sideburns down past the little part of your ear.
Right.
I used to bring them down there, and then I would put tape over them, knowing when we were going to go to inspection. And nobody's saying anything. And one day this officer comes up and he just rips the thing off. It really hurt me. He pulls it off and he gave me a demerit and told me to go shave immediately because he wasn't going to let me go for the weekend like that. And then we were only allowed to have 2 inches on top, and I used to get 3 and 4, and I shape it. Most of the time I had my hat on, they couldn't tell, but I wanted to look I ended up buying a wig. I bought a wig, so when I go down to New York City, I look like a hippie, And that's how we got past the MPs. Is I got an old Army olive green, like a winter type jacket, and I kind of scruffed it up, and I put the 101 Airborne on the wing. I made it up, made it look like it was an authentic thing, but it was, how hippies in those days were wearing the Army stuff, and I could get right past the MPs. They did. I even hear them grumble. They under their breath, they go, "Goddamn hippie!" I'm sitting there going, "I'm a cadet." He didn't know it.
You're walking around the village with your.
Yeah, I go down to New York City all the time. I had a friend that had a car. There was a Catholic girls' college right outside our gates called Lady Cliff, and he had a girlfriend at Lady Cliff, and we'd park. His father was the direct aide. His father was the chief of staff to the senator from Virginia. So we would leave his car. He had a brand new Chevy Impala 71, and we would leave it at the Lady Cliff. We'd be in our wigs and our fake looking, hippie outfit and go right past the MP. So again, then we take off our wigs and get in the car and just throw it down to New York City and have a ball,
Love it.
And come back late at night.
So when you left UCLA, you got? Sorry, so you got a degree in engineering, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, no, it was a Bachelor of Science.
Bachelor of Science, okay. And then went to work for who?
While I was in college, first year I was a theater manager because I loved movies, and I worked for. It started out as Lowe's, but then it became General Cinema,
Yeah, right.
and I worked there for like almost a year. Then I got a job. Well, actually, I was I was the manager of the theater. Then one day a guy comes into work at PSA and he says, "Hey, I got a friend as a contractor, and he just went from no jobs to 20 jobs in 3 days because he put all these low bids in and he got them all and he decided to accept them and go for it." So he said he's looking for skilled and unskilled labor. And I'd always help my dad. I had two grandfathers engineer, dad was an engineer. I was the oldest of four. Like the house that you've been in Torrance,
Yeah,
that where our den is, that was an open patio.
my goodness.
And my dad, we converted it into a room, for the family. It was a family room den. So anyway, know how to fix toilets and stuff. And we used to build. My brother and I used to build tree forts all over southeast or right outside DC in our house in Maryland. We had 15 tree forts. The one that was right behind our house was we had shingles, we had paper and siding with wood siding. We didn't have windows, but my mom made curtains. We had full power out there. We had running water. we would stay out there. The only time my dad would make us come in, he had an intercom that could go one way. He could hear us, but we couldn't hear him. But he could press a button and he'd say to us, "Okay, you guys get inside," because that he was concerned because when the thunderstorms, the southern thunderstorms would come rolling through at night, and we're in a big tree out there in the back. So. But anyway, it was good times.
Amazing.
But so we were here till I graduated 70, go to West Point 71 and 72, and then finished up at UCLA. I started playing rugby my senior year in high school. It was a sport I was born to play, because I had wrestled and I played basketball, football, and baseball. But I like contact and I like smashing people. So, and football did a little of that, but rugby's the best sport. You ever seen a rugby game?
Well, and I played some rugby. You're right. It is a tough sport, and I'm sure then in the early 70s there wasn't a lot of people playing rugby, especially on the West Coast.
Yeah, well, and even on the East Coast, we had a British major who was an exchange officer, and he coached the Army soccer team and the Army rugby team. He had played professionally in both sports in England. And we would watch he had these old tapes of the British Lions playing the South African Springboks in the early 60s. Oh my God. I learned to play rugby watching those things. It was like intense. We always wanted to play the All Blacks. When I was at UCLA, we played the Australian Wallabies, their national team. We beat them. At West Point, we played the French national team and the Dutch national team. We beat them. We played Sandhurst, as they would say. That's where Winston Churchill went to school. It's like the equivalent. It's West Point to England,
Yeah.
Sandhurst. I think didn't Prince William went there.
Prince William
I think. But anyway.
That's right.
Yeah. But when I was at West Point, I was on the All-Stars for New York City. We played in a league in New York City, and the Manhattan Rugby Football Club had 5 full teams, and the first 3 were all Brits.
Oh my God.
And their first 2, they had guys from the British Lions. That's the national team of England. They had some guys from Wales national team and Scotland national team. It was intense, but they were all older guys. They were in their 30s, and we're like 19 to 21 average, no experience, but we practiced every day, and we got into great games with these guys. And then we played the Cornell Medical College, Fordham grads were the old Maroons, the old Blues were the Columbia grads. So I made the All-Star team a couple of times. We played the Fiji national team in Central Park in early March. It's cold. It was like 38 degrees, and they're playing barefooted. And we got cleats, and we're like stomping on their feet, and they're drawing blood from the tops of their feet. It was wild. They were crazy. The Samoans are crazy. We used to play out here in California against Tongans. Oh my God, those guys are crazy. And the tradition in Tonga is they have 2 breweries the size of the Budweiser plant out here in Van Nuys, and they never export any of their beer. It's drunk by the locals. And the Tongans here would say the tradition in Tonga is that the team that's losing with 5 minutes to go, it's their responsibility to start the fight that ends they get where the refs just blow the whistle and say game over because it's too crazy. And they said that's the tradition there. They never finish a game. It's the team that's losing with 5 minutes to go is supposed to start fighting. But crazy sport, but a lot of fun, and the socializing afterwards, what I loved. I mean, it's one of the things that kept me at West Point was that, there was like some life, it wasn't like this toy soldier stuff, like, because there's some guys at West Point that really just get into it, they get bought into all the bullshit. I knew I could have graduated if I wanted to, but I told you I had a roommate who was a 5-year man. You can look at his name was Glenn Webster, and his nickname was Fuzzy because he was from Louisiana, and remember Fuzzy Thurston, who played for the Packers?
Oh yeah.
And Jerry Kramer, they were the 2 starting guards. And in that famous Ice Bowl game with Dallas, they're the one they knew from watching the films that Jethro Pugh from the Cowboys liked to stand up at the goal line. So Jerry Kramer's job was to take him out, and Bart Starr went right through the hole that he created by taking him out. And I read Jerry Kramer's book, but his the other guard name was Fuzzy Thurston. And he was from Louisiana. I think he'd gone to LSU, and so did my friend had a full ride scholarship to LSU, and he came to West Point. And I go, Fuzzy, why did you come here? You could have been at one of the best schools in America in football. You'd be in the pros. And he says, I thought about it. He says, Eisenhower became president by going to West Point, so I figured I could I always wanted to be the mayor of Baton Rouge, so I figured if I had a West Point diploma, I'd be easy shoo-in for mayor. But he ended up being a 5-year guy, and I told you that you flunk one subject at West Point, you're out. One. He flunked in his sophomore year, he flunked chemistry and physics, and they kept him because he was a starting right guard as a sophomore on the football team. Crazy. And so he played 2 or 3 more years, but he became a 3-star general. He was in charge of NORAD.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, Glenn was we had my oldest daughter when she was just born. I was watching her for my wife so she could go out, and I was rocking her in a rocking chair and feeding her a bottle, and I'm watching PBS, and they had this. It was by these left-wing guys. It was a documentary about the waste in our government, and they showed Army tanks that they would run down a street during the war games they would do in West Germany, and the fences. They would run over both sets of fences for the white picket fences because the tracks would just run right over and destroy them. And coming right behind them was the Army Corps of Engineers rebuilding the fences. And they had to do that every year when they had these games. So that was the only way through. They couldn't go around them because of the density. They go down these streets. And so they go, well, now we're going to switch to the PR officer for this unit, Major Glenn Webster. And I couldn't believe it. I'm going, he was such a loosey-goosey guy, and there he is all straight with this arm. He looked like Patton with his helmet on. And he's going, and he's doing they used to teach us argumentative writing at West Point and argumentative talk, like how to respond to the liberal congressmen and senators, so you could get your budget approved and stuff. It was funny.
Oh my goodness. As we wrap up, let me ask you just a couple other things. How in the world did you get to know Wolfgang Puck?
Well, I got my license. I started in construction. I started to tell you that a friend at PSA came in and said, this guy's looking for help. And I ended up I did day trades. So my normal days off were Thursday and Friday. So I would work. Anyway, I worked it. So I worked construction Monday to Thursday, and then I would get my 40 hours in at PSA Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I worked double on Saturday, a double on Sunday, and then I'd work on Monday, and then I would sleep in, and then I'd work construction Tuesday to Friday. And I really loved it because I go, I'm not in the Teamsters union. It doesn't matter when you got hired. It measures how good you are, getting promoted. And I got promoted, and then I went back to school at Santa Monica Junior College and just took all kinds of carpentry and construction and blueprint reading and estimating classes, and the rest was history. But I taught myself, I really like framing, wood framing. And I framed for like almost 10 years. And in California, you have to have 5 years experience in the trades before you can go for your license. And so I was hearing about all these guys who are saying, oh, there's this guy over here, you pay him $2,000 and you'll be tested the next week. And I said, nah, I don't want to get that. That'll go on my record if I'm part of one of this. The guys got busted. So I decided there's probably a reason they want you to have experience. And so I had to do a lot. I had my own crew of guys. I had 5 guys that worked for me, but I had no insurance. I had no workman's comp. I had no liability. I had no license, but I worked on referrals, and I got some great referrals. I mean, I had, I did a lot of work for movie stars, some with a license, some without. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger, I did a restaurant for him called Shotzi.
Amazing.
I did Malcolm McDowell and Mary Steenburgen's house when she won the Academy Award for Melvin. And did you ever see Melvin and Howard?
No.
Oh, it's a great. Jason Robards plays Howard Hughes.
Okay.
It's a great movie. It's called Melvin and Howard.
I'll watch that.
And it was a true story that when Howard Hughes died, he only had one will in his safety deposit box. His lawyer put it there, and it was handwritten by Howard Hughes on the envelope. It said, "To Melvin Dumar, the milkman," and that's all he knew. And Paul Lamont plays Melvin Dumar. Did you ever see American Graffiti?
Yes.
Lucas's movie about his life growing up in Fresno. With all the great music and the cars. Right. And at the end, there's a guy driving the yellow canary, souped up Ford T-Bird, and he gets in a race with Harrison Ford's character, who's with Shirley.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yes.
Yeah, she had broken up with, I think Ronnie Howard was in that movie too.
That's right.
And even the guy from Jaws. What was it? The guy with the glasses. I'll think of his name.
I know.
He's a pretty good. He's been in a lot of movies. And anyway, so Mary Steenburgen's character was the first wife of Paul Lamont, or who was playing Melvin Dumar, and she won for Best Supporting Actress that year. And the reason I remember that was the year Reagan got shot. He got shot on a Monday.
Right.
And that was the day. In those days, that's when the Academy Awards used to be on, was Monday night, not Sunday like it is now. And it was on Mondays, and they delayed the Academy Awards one day because Reagan had been the president of the Screen Actors Guild and he was president of the United States. And the reason I remember was Malcolm McDowell. I think you know who you probably seen movies, a lot of movies with him. Great guy too. And he wanted to do something for Mary in case she didn't win the Academy Award. He wanted to get her something. So he bought her a white lacquered Kawai stand-up piano. Beautiful, right? And he didn't want her to know about it. So he said, can you stick around after we live in the limo to go to the awards and receive it? And he says, I want to put it right here. And so I cleared the area. And then I get a call from him about an hour later. We didn't have cell phones in those days. They were driving down to the Shrine. It was at the Shrine downtown. They lived in Hollywood, and they were going down the 101, and it was just packed. And their driver said, I better turn on KNX and see what they didn't have GPSs then. So he turns on the radio, right? And they said, oh, the president's been shot and the Academy Awards have been delayed. So he tells Malcolm and Mary that. So Malcolm goes, they had already gotten off. And he says, you see that 7-Eleven? Pull over there. And there was payphones in those days, at 7-Elevens. So he goes to the payphone, and he first calls to me. He goes, Bob, you got to get out of there. We're coming back. And I'm trying to ask him why. And he says, don't ask why. Just do it. He says that the president's been shot. I didn't even know. And I go, really? And he goes, yeah, they delayed the Academy Awards. So he says, next call, I'll call the delivery company and tell them not to deliver the piano. So the next day, I'm working there again. And then on Tuesday, they went to the Academy Awards again. She's all dolled up, ready to go. He's going. And then I received the piano, and it was so cool to come to work on Wednesday. And there's the Academy Awards sitting there on the piano that she won, for Melvin and Howard. So, but it's a great movie. Jason Robards plays Howard Hughes so well. It's probably the way he really was. And it's a cute story. I mean, he hand wrote to Melvin Dumar $151 million he was the wealthiest man in the world at the time he died.
Yeah, that exactly.
I think he was worth $3 billion in those days.
And wasn't he?
He owned all those casinos, and he owned the Sands, I think.
But wasn't this guy living in Utah? I think that I've heard.
Yeah, he lived in Utah. Yeah, Melvin Dumar lived in Utah.
That's right. That's what I
especially with his second wife. They lived up in the northern part of Utah, and they ran like a convenience store gas station.
Right.
I
Exactly.
forget the actress's name. I think her name was Bonnie Bedelia or something. She played his second wife, but Mary just steals the show. She's so talented. And
Oh, goodness.
yeah, so I've worked with lots of other celebrities too, and producers, and
And how many
so. But
restaurants did
anyway,
you
back to Wolfgang.
do
So
for
the
Wolfgang?
first job, I just got my license in the end of November '81, and a friend of mine calls and says, "Hey, I got this job over on Sunset. They're going to build this restaurant called Spago," and I'd never even heard of Wolfgang Puck, and so, but I knew where it was because it was next to Tower Records on Sunset across the street. And I get there, and my friend, I knew he was going to be late, and I got there anyway. I waited a half an hour for him, and the place was a dump. I mean, I hear I'm a new contractor, and you're supposed to have one chemical toilet for every 10 men on the job in a 40-hour week. And I'm like, I come up, and there's a guy taking a dump in the parking lot behind tumbleweeds. There was tumbleweeds all over. All the demolition from the restaurant had been put outside and never put in a container and taken off the job. It was it looked like a junkyard,
Oh
and
my.
they were supposed to be done in a week.
Oh my goodness. And so
Yeah.
how many restaurants did you end up doing for Wolfgang?
I built somewhere around, I lost count, but it was around close to 450.
Oh my goodness.
And I've done about 250 retail stores and offices.
Oh my goodness.
I've done tilt-up construction, where you pour the slab and then you see the big industrial parks where they tilt the walls up and then they drop the lid in.
Yes.
And then, I've done probably 10 to 15 earthquake rehabs, where you got to go in and reinforce, do a diaphragm on the whole roof and put in a moment frame in the front and the back, so that holds the walls together.
Yes, exactly.
I've done I've done high-end custom homes. I did 3 homes for Ron Perlman, the owner of Revlon. Trying to think, I've worked for the Canadian actor that was in MASH. He's a great Donald Sutherland.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I've worked for Donald Sutherland.
Amazing. Well, this new company that we're doing some work for, we're really excited about it. Maybe you could talk about it for just a minute. Talk about
Sure.
how, this is really different from some of the things that you've been doing too, right?
Well, I think it fits right in with LSI's
It does for sure.
logo of solution development,
Right.
and this is a solution for this planet right now. So we don't have to get so crazy about going all electric so fast, or we can build the infrastructure properly so we got plenty of generating electricity. So we don't have, like Newsom's telling us last summer, well, you would choose if you're going to charge, don't charge your cars because otherwise you're going to have a rolling blackout because you're going to be short at your house.
Right.
And they're talking about the military having electric tanks. You're crazy.
Yeah, I know.
Wait, enemy, hold off. We need 10 minutes to recharge, and then we can come back into battle with you. It's like, but this product that we have, it's got beautiful aspects all the way around. The average fuel savings using it is 15%. The product, we call it Oxon 2, and it's basically it's 200% ethanol. But the key that we have, and nobody's been able to, what do you call it when they reverse engineer? They haven't been able to reverse engineer, and we wanted to see if they could, and they couldn't. So that's what convinced us to go forward. And we got patents in India and China and here in the U.S. We got for use. We got patents, and nobody else. But as far as manufacturing, the only patent we have is in the United States. We plan to keep the only manufacturing. It's in Henderson, and so we can control it. Nobody else, and we'll just ship it out from there. But the beauty of what the chemist did, or the scientist invented it, was he's got a way of electromagnetically changing the molecules of the ethanol so that they then change the molecules of the diesel fuel or the biofuel or the jet fuel or the unleaded gas. And we've had it tested at UC Riverside, which is a famous lab for the California AQMD, which is the strictest in the world, and they fully endorse our product. It says it's an incredible product. And the University of Belgium is equivalent to what UC Riverside here is in the States. They're equivalent for that in Europe, and we've got a patent in what's in Europe that's pending right now.
Amazing.
But we found through all the places it's tested, depending on the engine, the average has been 10 to 15% fuel economy, but the product only costs half of that savings. So you're not so you're able to there will be an increase to use it, but it's not that much that it doesn't get covered by the fuel economy. And you still have, maybe another 8 to 10% for fuel economy, depending on the engines that are used.
Yeah.
And then we get an average of 21% reduction in CO2, which is huge. The NOx emissions go down an average of 60 to 85%, which is very huge. And the particulate matter is 95%.
It's fantastic.
And and health-wise, it's been proven that the particulate matter it prevents premature deaths. That people have died from the consumption of particulate matter, and we know that it cuts it by 20% right now. Those deaths. It increases for economy, increases the GDP by 2.5%.
We think there's so much opportunity with this product. Our team has worked with a lot of these organizations over the last 50 years that now are really focused on reducing emissions, particulate emissions, and the Department of Energy has a real interest in this. The Department of Defense has an interest in this product. EPA, obviously.
Transportation.
Interior, the Department of Transportation, and there's so much funding for this. So we're very excited to start down this path.
I can give you 2 bona fides we have right now.
Love it.
In Brazil, they've been testing it, and Sao Paulo, Brazil has the largest municipal bus fleet in the world, 18,000 buses all running on diesel. And they put us up against an electric bus company, and we won hands down. And they're doing one last final test right now, and the country of Brazil is going to mandate through their direct Secretary of Transportation is going to mandate that all the buses or all the vehicles, government vehicles in the whole country are going to go on this thing. And they're going to start with Sao Paulo with their 18,000 buses. They have major pollution problem there. There's all that diesel going out in the air all day long.
We're excited to be working this with you. Bob, this has been so much fun, and I really so appreciate you reminiscing and talking about your dad, who was
I appreciate the opportunity.
Such an important part of my life, and I think about him a lot, and I'm excited to be working with you and your new company. It's just such an honor. So thank you so much, and thanks for carving out this time today. It's been fantastic. I really appreciate it.
You as well. Thank you.